the Dialed In Angling podcast presented by OnX Fish, Fish USA, Ski-Doo, Runnings, Minnesota DNR, Strike Master, 13 Fishing, L&M Fleet Supply, and DeWalt. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in this week. Once again, I have been all over the map from out in South Dakota to the western Minnesota on Big Stone. I got an opportunity to fish big bluegills with my son, as you heard last week's podcast. That was an absolute blast, but it was not only fun catching bluegills on that lake, it was just fun being out in that part of the world. We caught perch, we caught walleyes, we caught big crappies. As we kind of peeled the curtain back last week and told you about, it was a fun event. From there, I had an opportunity to rip up and fish with my good buddy, Remington Moran, once again. This week's episode, you're going to want to tune in. We're unlocking the secrets of crappies on Leech Lake, at least for giving you just a real smidge of, what we encountered. We filmed that episode in a very short time. We got out there, we filmed it within a few hours. We got some really nice crappies, so you're going to want to tune into that episode. It's great. Remington spends a ton of time on Leech Lake. He's a great angler, an absolute dynamite stick, summer and winter. Rem called me and he's like, dude, I am catching some really nice crappies right now on Leech. And when it comes to big crappies, I'm in anywhere. Like if someone calls me and says, hey, I'm catching big crappies, I'm in. I want to go. I love catching crappies. I always have since I've been a little kid. And panfish in general, I spend a ton of time on the ice, on the water, chasing walleyes primarily, perch at times, and of course smallmouth bass in the summer. But when I get an opportunity to do some pan fishing, especially for large panfish, I'm in. And we were catching crappies. I'll tease out a little bit. I don't want to get too deep into the episode, but the fish we were catching were pretty shallow. And, so anytime someone says, hey, we can go crappie fishing, and it's not some deep wintering basin where I have to worry about killing a bunch of fish out in 40, 50 feet of water. I don't like that. But when you're talking big panfish, especially big crappies in shallow water situations, absolutely love it. And what I love about crappies versus gills, it's more of a dance, if you will, or it's a cat and mouse where you're really finesse fishing. You're trying to get these big bluegills to bite. Everything has to be perfect. Your line has to be perfect. Your presentation has to be perfect. And there's a lot of times where the gills just aren't biting. We joke around a lot when we're fishing, like, oh, here comes another one, staring contest, because they come in and they analyze that bait. And so you really have to be dialed in as far as, the right line pound test, making sure that you don't have any memory in your line, no twisting. Everything has to be perfect most of the time. I mean, late ice, the gills get a lot more aggressive, and obviously in the summer, they're just a totally different species. But in the winter months, when they're super, super negative, if you will, or neutral, sometimes gill fishing, especially in January, just doesn't turn me on. But crappie fishing, on the other hand, does. Crappies come in. They can also be very finicky and analyze baits, as you'll see in this episode. But for the most part, crappies are coming in and they're crushing it, right? And that's what makes it fun for me because, I'm chasing walleyes and walleyes can get just as finicky come January, February. And so it's sort of a break for me to get out and chase crappies, especially if they're aggressive, but really if they're big. And I don't mind working a little bit harder for the bigger ones. Versus, like your typical like fish fry crappies. I would sort of put them in different classes. When you're dealing with big crappies, for example, I don't eat big crappies just like I don't eat big gills. I like releasing those fish. They're great spawners. A lot of those great big females and those big year classes of just really thick, wide body crappies in that 13, 14, 15 inch range, I think should be thrown back. I tend to keep crappies. If I'm going to eat some crappies, they're going to be smaller. They're going to be that 9, 10 inch range, usually mixed in with a few smaller gills if I can. I just don't like eating the big crappies. I don't like the taste of them, first of all. But second of all, I'm more about the genetics. Like, I want to make sure that there's big crappies in the system and so that they can go on and do their thing. Now, these big lakes like Leech Lake, Winnebagosh, Mille Lacs, Vermilion. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing a few across Minnesota. Rainy Lake, Rainy River, Rainy Lake in particular. Giant crappies, these big bodies of water may not have some of the spawning habitats that some smaller fisheries have as far as the amount of vegetation throughout the system. And so they tend to be more of a lower density when it comes to numbers of fish, but much bigger caliber crappies. And so there's always this sort of legend or lore about, Leech Lake crappies or Winnebagosh crappies or Mille Lacs or Rainy Lake crappies. And if you've seen photos of them, if you've caught them for yourselves, you know that they're built differently. Red Lake is that same prime example. They're just built differently. They've got a bigger body. They're wider, from dorsal fin to belly. They're much longer. And of course, they're a lot thicker in as far as the meat and how they're built. I mean, they're just a bigger species of fish. And there's other small fisheries that have those great big built crappies, and I've chased them before. I tend to find bigger fish like that a little bit shallower than a lot of your typical basin style of fishing lakes, if that makes sense. Sometimes it could be on weed flats. Sometimes it could be in shallower basins that are adjacent to flats. Sometimes it's these fish will creep up on humps towards evening. I know, lots and lots of different times where I'm seeking out, let's say, bluegills, for example, and I bump into these very giant, large crappies, these monsters, and they're in that shallower water situation. They're in weeds, for example, or they're in a shallower basin that, goes up into a weed bed or onto a hump. I've had it too where it's been one single hump that you can seek out that has basin all around it, or a tighter break that may have some weeds or some vegetation at one point throughout the season. And, especially if it's green vegetation, those fish will slide from that basin up onto that structure. And that's typically where I can find some of these larger crappies in the winter. Not always. There are times where I've found them in basins plenty of times, but it seems like now, especially with forward-facing sonar and just fishing pressure in general, pre-forward-facing sonar, a lot of people seek out wintering basins on a lot of different lakes, and I think a lot of those lakes get pressured, and therefore, those bigger crappies either got caught or they just push out of that basin. But it seems like these bigger fish that I find are up in these basins, and so are not in these basins. They're up shallow adjacent to the basins. And so in this week's podcast, I want to talk a little bit about crappies, different lakes, different areas you can look for crappies in the winter. I want to talk a little bit more about technique, whether it be spoon techniques, plastics, some of my go-to favorites for crappies. And then also later in this podcast, I just want to talk a little more about pan fishing. Last week, we talked a lot about bluegills. And so on the other side of pan fishing is perch. I've spent a ton of time on Mille Lacs Lake over the last few weeks chasing perch. And I want to talk about perch fishing as well. Because, right now we're catching a lot of perch on Mille Lacs, but they're not in the big numbers that you see typically in February and March. Where we're catching them are adjacent to walleye areas. And a lot of these perch already, they're spitting up bloodworms, they're spitting up bugs, they're already feeding on invertebrates. So, spoon fishing or call baits to get them to call in or to call them in, but then downsizing to plastics are really key. So let's take a quick break here. When we come back, I want to talk crappie fishing. I want to talk techniques. I want to talk about a couple different areas that you can look for crappies, typically where these fish will move from basins into the shallows, what to look for, what types of lakes to look for, and then, of course, some key areas that you can look for these great big crappies that'll be in these systems, even though you might be used to just driving right to the basin or the deepest part of the basin looking for fish. I'm going to talk about some of these areas that I break down, that I catch bigger fish, and most of the time these will hold bigger fish all season long. So stay tuned. We've got more Dialed In Angling when we come back. The cold months are rolling in, but that doesn't mean the adventure slows down. There's only one way to make the most of winter, with the 2026 Ski-Doo lineup. Whether you're heading deep into your favorite fishing spots or carving your own path off the grid, Ski-Doo is built to take you there. And there's a reason Ski-Doo has been the best-selling snowmobile brand for more than 2 decades. Proven, reliable, world-class performance. Winter moves fast. If you want it, get it.
It's that time of year again, anglers. Winter is here, and L&M Fleet Supply is ready to make this your best season ever. Head into your favorite L&M Fleet Supply location across northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, or Michigan's UP, and browse the extensive collection of DeWalt tools and accessories, all guaranteed tough. Cut through the thickest ice with DeWalt's 20-volt drill. Brighten your setup with the assortment of 20-volt portable LED lights. And stay entertained with the DeWalt Bluetooth 20-volt speaker. It's weather-resistant, rugged, and ready for any adventure. Check out DeWalt's guaranteed tough deals and more at L&M Fleet Supply. Together, they're the perfect match for all your ice fishing needs.
With the holiday season behind us, if you didn't get the gift you wanted for Christmas or this last holiday season, look no further. You're going to check out fishusa.com. All of the best fishing brands under one roof. Check out fishusa.com for all of your angling needs. Okay, let's start with the basin itself. We talk a lot on Dialed In Angling about basins. And, basins to me are sort of that softer bottom area, the deeper areas, the depression areas. It could be a round structure, or it could be structureless. It could be just a shoreline with, drops off into that 30-foot, quote, air quotes, crappie hole, where in the winter months, these fish will slide out to these basins. And a lot of lakes, the reasons basins have become so popular over the last 20 years is, and really it's been the onset of, I would say, the flasher. When Vexlar came out, or the early Markhams came out, that really, kind of solidified the fact that anglers could go out to basins and find fish. And they'd find schools of crappies, they'd find schools of bluegills, you'd catch northern pike that would be chasing these schools, you'd be catching walleyes out in these basins. A lot of these fish slide out to these basins because the entire food web's out there, the water's a little bit warmer. A lot of lakes, the vegetation dies off, and so there's an oxygen depletion in that shallow water. And so they slide out to these areas and they spend their winter months in wintering basins. That's why they call it a winter basin. Now, there's nuance to the basins. A lot of times I'll look for the softest bottom I can in those basins when I'm looking for crappies and bluegills. The other thing is I'm looking for edges or an inside turn or something that's going to hold fish, where fish are frequenting these edges of basins, because quite frankly, some of these lakes that have just a giant vast basin, they're hard to find. Even with forward-facing sonar, it's hard to track down fish in those basins. I have the greatest technology in the world with some of state-of-the-art depth finders that I have, mapping technology, and yet I can think of lakes that it's extremely hard to get on the fish in these basins because they move a lot. I mean, if you look on episode 2, season 3, where Rem and I were out in the wintering basin, it was early ice, there was no snow. These fish were extremely spooky. Now, granted, these were a little bit shallower basins, but they weren't extremely shallow. I mean, we're talking 24 to 28 feet deep, but these fish were still spooking like they were right underneath our feet. And so that becomes the challenge sometimes in the basin, is you spook fish, but also try to break it down. The lake we were on where we filmed episode 2, that lake comprised of miles and miles and miles of basin. And so it was really tough to get on the fish just based on the overwhelming amount of area that's there. But then also we had to figure out where we could pin those fish within that basin. Now, we did find the majority of the bigger fish were up on the edges, like I talked about. If you can pin them in a corner, let's say a basin that is in between two sets of structure, it could be just kind of a little bulging area where, those fish will slide in there. Sometimes it's the deepest part within that little area, if that makes sense. The fish will kind of cruise that deepest little depression. Sometimes it's just the overall size of the basin itself. If it's a really, really small basin, it's easy to check with your forward-facing sonar and kind of pin those fish down there. But it seems like the bigger fish to me are either higher in the water column or they're up a little bit shallower. And I think if you talk to a lot of panfish anglers in general, they will say if you can find a weedy bay or a shallower basin with some really good standing green weeds or something like that, you can typically find bigger crappies, bigger panfish in those areas than you will out in the wintering basins. And not to say that there's not big fish out there in certain lakes. There certainly are. I can think of a ton of them in my head. But, for the most part, day in and day out, like if I were to search lakes for big panfish, I would start with the weeds first. Even though the wintering basins, you're probably going to have better success because there's more fish there. You can see them. It's easier to see them. Even without forward-facing sonar, you can drill holes and typically land on a school of crappies or bluegills or a mix of fish. However, these weed beds, scouring these weed beds take time, not just forward-facing sonar. I like to use my underwater cameras. I carry around that Markham Pursuit camera all the time with me. It's always in my vehicle. It's in my snowmobile. It's on my four-wheeler. I use that a lot for identifying species. Forward-facing sonar is great when you get in the cabbage. You can still see the fish up shallow. You can run it in perspective mode if you want, or you can forward face it. But it's nice to have that underwater camera. And there's times where, hey, maybe the fish are spooking because of the signal or whatever it may be. Having that underwater camera down when you actually start fishing helps you a lot with not spooking those fish, but then also identifying the bigger fish that are within those schools. And if you watch, like even the footage that we had from Dialed In Angling last week, you'll see schools of fish come through, but the big ones are typically together. We see that a lot with crappies. This next Dialed In Angling episode that you watch with me and Rem, when you watch that underwater footage, the footage of the graphs that we have, you'll see these big fish cruise together. And we had some real giants that came in. We fished Leech Lake. Again, it's unlocking the crappies on Leech Lake. But whether it's leech, whether it's any of these big bodies of water that hold big panfish, it could be even just sort of, it doesn't have to be a giant like a lake like Mille Lacs or Leech or Winnie or Rainy or Red Lake. It could be a medium-sized lake that has really good crappies. I would start shallow first, even in the dead of winter. Like, we're in the first part of January right now, but even as you get into February, as long as there's green weeds and green vegetation and we continue to have a winter where we don't have a ton of snow like we do now, you're still going to have really good green vegetation. If that's the case, those fish will be up there. And as we get towards late ice, it's incredible how many of those fish will move in shallow, especially in the afternoons as the waters start to warm up. Let's say when the ice is completely, the snow is completely melted, the ice is exposed, those fish will slide shallow. And not only will they slide shallow, a lot of them will slide right underneath the ice. And we'll talk about that on Dialed In Angling podcast when we get closer to that time period. But that, in a nutshell, is probably my favorite time of year to chase down big crappies, is late ice, right underneath the ice, way up shallow. It could be in rice. It could be in bulrushes. It could be in extremely shallow vegetation. I've caught fish, inches below the surface, inches below my hole. I've had to even come up almost in my hole to grab a bait because they're up feeding on bugs. The oxygen levels are up. The temperature in the water is starting to climb, and those fish are getting aggressive, but they are extremely spooky. The higher these fish are in the water column, the shallower you fish, you will experience spooky panfish. And so when you watch this Dialed In Angling episode where Rem and I are set up on Leech, we're set up. We're not moving, and you'll have to tune into the episode to get the rest of the details. That's all I'm going to cheat out from this episode, but it's really cool. We got some really nice panfish on Leech Lake. We didn't get giants, but they're pretty darn big. I mean, all of the crappies we caught were very, very quality fish, and we did it in very short order, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We just set up in a weed bed and had a blast. And anytime you catch crappies of that caliber consistently like that, super fun. And the way that we did it was, really anyone can. Flipping over the otter, getting your mark them down, getting your technology in the water and watching fish come in, making sure you have the right presentation. And so I want to get into that next. Breaking down presentations for crappies that are my absolute go-to. Okay, there's a couple things that I almost always have tied up. One for sure would be a straight-tailed plastic of sorts. Okay, so a really small 32nd or 16th ounce tungsten jig. So that jig is, you tie it in a manner so that thing sits, horizontal in the water column, and then having some sort of straight-tailed plastic, like the 13 Banff, any of the nymph, sort of profiles of having that straight tail. Now, I vary the colors of my bait from real natural presentations like the blacks and the browns and that sort of thing to having real bright white, pink, Wonder Bread. Purple Rain is another color that I'm growing fond of in the 13 plastic lineup. But having kind of those color spectrums within those straight tail plastics for crappies is a must. Okay, and where I typically will use those is when the fish get really, really finicky. They analyze the baits. Sometimes it could be middle of the day where they're really active morning and evening and at night, but then during the day they're super, super. They move slow, or they're not aggressive, or they're analyzing the baits. I always have that straight tail plastic rigged up. Episode 2 was no different. When we filmed that, they wanted that straight tail plastic. Rem stuck with the small spoon, which is my next choice. Having a small spoon with a couple of maggots tipped on there, Eurolarva. You can even put a waxworm if you want, but a 16th ounce or smaller, 32nd ounce bull spoon or flash champ or rattle and roach spoon with that little bit of marabou on the bottom. Any of those selections in the smallest size you can possibly get for crappies. Some of my favorite colors, obviously in super clear water, I like golds and the silvers and things that mimic, bait fish that they're feeding on. Because bigger crappies, in these lakes, they're eating perch, and they're eating small young of the year perch. They're eating shiner minnows, big schools of shiner minnows, even small ciscos in lakes like Leech Lake. So having those real natural profiles as far as color profiles is huge for those spoons. Also having, the real bright colors on some of the real darker lakes, having those real bright pinks, pink UV, pink squirrel is another one of mine that's a real favorite. I love pink colors. Also the Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread's a great bright glow color that I can use. I use that all the time in that small bull spoon, even in that rattle and roach spoon. It's one of my favorites. Any of those pink UVs with that pink tail on there, just tipping it with a couple Eurolarvas are huge. Now, the third choice that I have, and I'm not ranking these in order, I'm just saying these are my 3 absolute go-tos. Okay, a number 3 jigging wrap, a small jigging wrap, or now, even before I get into horizontal baits in general, I should say, like a number 3 jigging wrap, a number 3 rip and wrap, a number 4 rip and wrap works great for bigger fish. Sometimes I like a bigger profile bait for bigger crappies. I think those big crappies don't care at times, and they'll come in and rock any bait. But if you want to keep it right along the same, sort of that horizontal presentation, the category, if you will, the nano wrap. I've become a very huge fan of the Nano Wrap. I like the colors of the Nano Wrap. I like that small profile. It imitates, just sort of a small minnow in the water or something like that. And it seems like crappies can't resist it. This episode, we use the Nano Wrap. Rem and I were like, hey, let's use some Nano Wraps. I've had tremendous success last year using the Nano Wrap. Want to use it this year. So him and I were using Nano Wraps, had great success. We caught a ton of fish on the Nano Wraps, and it's just one of those baits that is always tied up in one of my boxes. So those are kind of my three categories: tungsten and plastic, spoons, and then your horizontal baits, your jigging wraps, your Nano Wraps, your slab wraps. Now, if I'm breaking down the horizontals even further, the jigging wraps I like in sort of that basin situation, whereas the rippin' wraps, the Nano Wraps, I like, and even slab wraps are in those same category. I like using those in shallower water. They deploy much slower, they float a little bit more, and, quite frankly, if you're fishing in a wintering basin, 20, 25 feet, something like that, it takes a while to get down there. Plus, if you're hole hopping with those lighter horizontal baits, it's just harder to get it down there. Nothing better when you're hole hopping than a spoon or a jigging wrap, because you can punch through the slush. You don't have to worry about cleaning all your holes. If you get a little ice in your holes, you can get that bait down there quickly, and you can have total control over that bait in that basin. And so those are sort of my go-tos. And a lot of times on my Markham, when I'm just hole hopping around with my Markham, on the back of like that shuttle, it holds 2 rods. I almost always have 2 rods set up. I've talked about it on Dialed In Angling. It's that 1-2 punch. So I'll have either a spoon and a plastic, or a spoon and a Nano Wrap, or I'll have a jigging wrap and a soft plastic, a straight tail plastic. But I almost always carry 2 rods around with me. It's very, very helpful. That way, if they won't hit the jigging wrap, I'll come back and use the plastic. The other thing that I will say on a lot of my horizontal baits, instead of tipping it with something like even a wax worm, a lot of times that'll screw up the action. I hardly ever use a minnow head. You can do a couple of sneaky things. One, I'll use just a very tip of like a straight tail plastic. So if you look at the 13 plastics, like the BAMP, for example, where you've got that really tiny, minute, little tiny piece of plastic on the end, ones that are either sliding off my hook or are used or whatever, I'll take those off and I'll just hook it on one treble hook. Okay. That little hair-like, plastic on there, straight tail plastic, is enough to draw the fish to that treble hook. Okay. Or you could tip it with 1 Eurolarva. Instead of chandeliering and loading it up, sometimes that screws up the action, especially on like a Nano Wrap. I will absolutely just put 1 Eurolarva on one section of the treble hook. That way those fish can key in on that. They look at that and they're up, and boom, they hit the treble hook. Panfish in general, bluegills are notorious for it, but panfish in general are inefficient feeders. If you watch them on an underwater camera, they'll hit the jig heads a lot of times. They'll hit the back of it. Even crappies with that bigger mouth, for them to get that treble hook perfectly in their mouth, a lot of times I'll tip that, and that will help with better hookup percentages. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that's helpful for you. Hopefully I've kind of broke down how I go about looking for crappies, what I'm using for crappies. And I hope that helps you get dialed in if you're going crappie fishing with your friends, with your family, your kids. If you're doing some exploring on a new lake, that's sort of how I break it down. Now, I typically start shallow, but there's times where it may be a bust. And if it's a bust, then I start to go back out to those wintering areas, and I start looking around in those wintering areas, trying to find, better numbers of fish, just trying to be successful for that particular trip. So I would keep in mind too, I'm a huge believer in barotrauma. I've seen it firsthand with crappies. Anything deeper than 30 feet. I know there's a ton of debate out there, and people would probably argue with me, but I've seen it firsthand. I've walked out into wintering basins where there's crappies frozen all over in the ice, where they came up through the ice. I've seen it in areas too where I can see the crappies underneath the ice after they've been released, and I see giant pike feeding on these crappies right below the ice. And so I've seen it firsthand. I've seen barotrauma. It's a real thing. And so I'm conscious of that when I'm seeking out bodies of water that I want to go fishing on, especially if I'm not going to keep fish. Anything deeper than 30, I'm just trying to avoid, especially 30, 35, 40 feet, unless I'm going to harvest fish. And if that's the case, I'm going to keep my 5 or 10 or wherever is allotted, and then I'm done. And, I think a lot of anglers are going to have to sort of have that same mindset if you want to see these lakes succeed and be successful in the future. And then, of course, just releasing these big panfish. I think there's a lot of anglers out there that already currently do that. I see a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of Instagram reels where people are catching big ones and putting them back. Good for you. So we're going to take a quick pause. When I come back, we're going to break down some perch fishing. I've done a ton of fishing on Mille Lacs once again this week. I've had customers out. I've been chasing walleyes. Seems like the walleye front's starting to slow down a little bit. We're still catching a ton of those small ones, but the bigger ones aren't coming in at as feverish a pace as they were in December. So I want to talk a little bit about Mille Lacs, but I want to key in on perch fishing because I absolutely love catching and targeting perch in the winter months. It's probably, if someone had to ask me, what's your favorite species to target in the winter, I would probably have to say jumbo perch. So stay tuned. We'll be back after this. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you, or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
There is nothing quite like Minnesota winter. Whether you want to try ice fishing, ice skating, or ice boating, make sure you know the risks and how to play safe on the ice. Measure ice thickness frequently and never go out alone. Always wear a life jacket or float coat and have ice picks readily accessible in case you fall through. Playing on the ice can be fun, but it's never 100% safe. Learn how you could play safe before you go out. Safety is always in season. A message from the Minnesota DNR.
All right, let's get into some perch talk here. I know a lot of people like myself love perch fishing in the winter months. Lakes like Mille Lacs, it was great to see last year all these jumbo perch show up on Mille Lacs. If you want to check out a great jumbo perch episode, Mitch Hackmuller and I were out here last year. We filmed that dialed in angling episode in a matter of a few hours, and we absolutely pounded them. Last year was such a great year for perch. I did multiple podcasts on how positively the perch have impacted businesses on Mille Lacs, the overall size structure of these fish. Mille Lacs can grow giant perch, just like Leech Lake, just like Winnebagosh, just like a lot of other lakes in northern Minnesota that have a really rich lower food web. And what I mean by that is you've got a lot of invertebrates, you've got a lot of bug hatches, you got a lot of bloodworms, plus you have a great crop of minnow species where you can grow these giant perch. Let's start with Mille Lacs because I've spent a ton of time out here. I will be on Winnie quite a bit this winter as a guide. I spend a ton of time out there. I like to go to Leech, to Cass, to all our great perch fisheries in northern Minnesota. Lake of the Woods is another one that's sort of a sleeper if you want to catch some giant jumbo perch. Lake of the Woods is another one where you can bump into some absolute beasts. But as far as Mille Lacs is concerned, really looking for these fish adjacent to transitions where you have rock to sand, rock to mud, but primarily rock to mud right now. I'm seeing a lot of these fish are spitting up some bugs. Yes. A lot of people say, oh, is that freshwater shrimp? No, it's a bug hatch. Mille Lacs Lake in general has hundreds and hundreds of bug hatches that hatch throughout the summer months, but they start coming out of the mud this time of year as nymphs, and they'll live down there until, it's time, whether it's a mayfly nymph, whether it's a fish fly nymph. All these nymphs start hatching this time of year. As we get into February, there'll be a lot more bug hatches occurring, and you'll see a lot of these perch will spit up all sorts of different bugs. I always analyze them, whether they're like a big mayfly nymph, or they're a small little fish fly, or you see the ones that are like striped. They almost look like armadillos to me. They're tiny. They're just tiny little bugs. Also, they're spitting up bloodworms. These bloodworms are coming out of the mud as well. And I've seen some of these small walleyes this year spitting up these bloodworms. So they're out in these areas eating this bait. Well, where does this bait live? Along these transitions. These nymphs are coming out of the mud, and so these perch are starting to follow. If you're out into these areas, I would typically look for that. If you want to track down some of these jumbo perch, I would typically look for that 29, 30, 32 feet. The problem with Mille Lacs perch, going back to what I was talking about with the crappies, is a lot of these fish are going to be susceptible to barrel trauma. So if you're coming out looking for jumbo perch, it's going to have to be sort of a harvest for you. Mille Lacs in general, unless you're in the shallow bays and the weeds, most of the time these fish that are coming out of this deeper water, especially deeper than 32 feet, their stomach comes up into their mouth, and so it really becomes a harvest opportunity. But there's a lot of people that are looking to harvest a few perch on Mille Lacs. They did reduce the limit from 20 to 10 this year, so keep that in mind. But if you're coming out here, look for these transition areas. And then once again, I use sort of the 1-2 punch for perch. I fish a lot of spoons. I fish a lot of jigging wraps, like a number 3, a number 5 jigging wrap. And a lot of times it's as a call bait. Excuse me. I want to get these fish to come to my location. And a lot of them are just roaming out in this basin. So I'm jigging high in the water column. So not only am I using a bigger presentation, but I'm using a larger presentation that I'm fishing high in the water column to draw those fish into my spot. And, you'll see a lot on underwater cameras that a lot of times they'll come in, and if they won't strike, you've got to be able to put down a really small tungsten tipped with a waxworm works great. You can tip it with Eurolarvas. I highly encourage you, if you're coming out to Mille Lacs perch fishing and you want to catch more fish, put down an underwater camera. Even put away the forward-facing sonar. A lot of times they're shying away from the signals on the forward-facing sonar. You put an underwater camera down and you can get them to bite. Okay, you can see the subtleties of the bait. You can see the fact if they come screaming into your spoon, but put on the brakes, downsize to a tungsten, and keep that underwater camera down. I use that a lot when I'm perch fishing, and with customers, sometimes it's the difference of them catching a bunch of perch and them catching very few. Today was prime example. We put the underwater camera down. I had some customers out. And yes, they were catching a few, but they were getting schools that were coming in that were literally putting the brakes on when they come in, and they were using spoons. I downsized to some tungstens. I had the tungsten tubby jig. I like the metallics. I like the golds. I like the more natural colors. Gold has been predominantly working all over the lake right now, and not just for perch, but walleyes as well. Juicy Lucy color is great. That's a VMC gold color that I'm absolutely in love with. Juicy Lucy, anything gold right now, in those tungsten jigs has been working really well. Reds have been working well. Also, rainbow color has been producing as well. Sort of got to just tip that waxworm on there, so it's running straight in line. So when I put my waxworm on, I kind of feed it through the body, and so that it's just sitting in line with my jig and dropping it horizontal. I'll drop it down to the mud, bring it back up, kind of work it in the water column, and then, if those fish still won't react or they start swimming away, I almost immediately dump it back down in the mud and then bring it back up very, very slowly and just hold it there. Don't even jig it, just kind of hold it there and let those big jumbo perch come in and suck it in. And so if you're doing that on a Mille Lacs, you're spoon fishing and then you're downsizing to some tungsten, you'll put some decent numbers of jumbo perch on the ice. Now, I will say, as far as the school sizes that we're seeing right now, we're not seeing the 20s and 30s and 50s like you see, or hundreds like you see typically in February and March. We're seeing schools of 5, 10, 15. Every once in a while, like I saw a school today, there was probably 25 perch in it, but that was a large school for what I've been seeing at this point in the year. As this light penetration continues, as things start to evolve throughout the winter and we get more and more bug hatches going on, you're going to see, kind of these broken up groups of 5 and 10 fish school up, and they start feeding and they start being these wolf packs as we get into February and March, and it becomes very, very fun. Mille Lacs is one of those lakes that you typically have to look a little bit deeper to find these perch. Now, you get on a lake like Winnebagosh or Leech, it can be just the opposite. Big numbers of giant perch shallow. I typically will look in the weed lines and I'll focus my effort shallow to get on big numbers of perch. And believe me, with Dialed In Angling, we're going to do some more perch footage. We're going to do some perch episodes. But me personally, just as an angler, as a guide, I spend a ton of time in February and March chasing perch, and I love it. I think it is, they are one of the funnest species to catch throughout the winter months. And then, of course, I like eating perch. I've said it on this podcast. Everyone knows I love fish fries. I love perch. I think perch are my favorite eating fish on any of the lakes that we have. I know people that love walleyes and love different species. For me, if I had to choose a species, it would definitely be a perch. So, all right, that wraps it up on this talk. We're going to cut to our fishing reports. All of our contributors have given another great fishing report as we get into January here. A lot of guys are going away from talking ice sickness and just focusing in on fishing, what they're seeing in their neck of the woods. And so hopefully you can take away from something that they bring to the table or offer up for advice. I truly appreciate these guys' contribution each and every week. And, reach out to these guys if they're guides, guys in the Brainerd Lakes area, like Trig Roach or Randon Olson out in Ottertail, or Josh Bullivant up at Leech Lake. Any of these contributors, Marcus Quam out in South Dakota, reach out to these guys if you want any information, or if you're looking to book a guide trip. These guys are the best in the business. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with some fishing reports, and then we'll wrap this baby up. Stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling coming your way.
Lake of the Woods fishing report. Resorts are out up to 25 miles now, almost to Garden Island in different areas. The Northwest Angle is fully up and running. The South Shore, they're all over from, like I said, from the Pine Island out to about 20 miles. Morning, evenings, still been a good walleye bite up in that 20 to 25 feet of water. There has been a very nice bite out in that 29 to 30 feet of water also going on. Still, the nano minnow has been unbelievable, and your pinks and your glows and your golds tipped with a fathead or a head of a minnow. That's the Lake of the Woods report.
Hi, Josh Bullivant here with Trappers Landing Lodge on beautiful Leech Lake. Here is your Leech Lake and surrounding area ice and fishing report. Currently, we are seeing 19 to 22 inches of ice steady across the lake. Walker Bay is reporting just a little bit different, but we did start seeing vehicle traffic out there. All resorts in the area are open to all size vehicle traffic. Please be aware there are still some cracks, so you want to make sure you're checking in with your resorts before you go heading out. But nice part is there's not a lot of snow on the ice, so you can get out, get to many spots and get spread out. Best bite this weekend or this past week, we were seeing fish caught in 16 to 20 feet of water for the walleyes. Still an evening bite, but I will tell you, the quality of bite and the quality of fish getting caught right now is amazing. We've seen numerous fish over 25 inches getting caught, just not the quantity maybe that people are looking for, but that quality bite is for sure going out there. Good areas to head to right now: Huddle's Reef, Rogers Point area on our end, Stony Point over on the further kind of central area, and then Greg's Break Line up in Traders Bay there. Find the edge of the weeds there as well for the walleye. For perch, you're going to want to look shallow. They're starting to move along those weed edges. Find that sand and chargrass edges, and anywhere let 12 feet or less, and you'll find those perch. For the crappies in the little lakes around here, they're starting to move out to the basins, and same with those bluegills. So from all of us here on beautiful Leech Lake, good luck out on the ice.
What's going on, guys? Randon Olson here with your Ottertail County Fishing Report. Ice conditions continue to be amazing up here. Snow is not an issue. Travel pretty much anywhere you want, which makes fishing awesome. You can go to any of our over 1,000 lakes that we have in the county, and you can go chase whatever you'd like to chase. It travels very easy. Fishing-wise, we're still seeing a lot of good fish getting caught. We're seeing a lot more fish showing up in the basins. As far as panfish goes, even some walleyes starting to cruise around out there as well. So that mud bite is starting to really pick up. Walleye front, deep weed edges, or even down into some of that deep gravel that's in that 20 to 25 foot range is really starting to show some good fish. So depending on the weather coming through, sometimes they want to be a little shallower in that weed edge and 15 to 18. Some days they want to stay out in that 20 to 25, 26 foot range. So smaller fatheads, plain hooks have been the best bait, but downsizing your jigging spoons with a minnow head or even a full fathead or a full crappie minnow on there is working very good as well. So if you're looking to get out in the area, we do still have some openings in our rentals. Come visit us at www.lockjawguideservice.com and get over and experience what Ottertail County has to offer.
Key Cog here with updates on lakes around the metro. I'm finding 9 to about 12 inches on most lakes. Panfish has been really good. Day bite has been on weed humps, good vegetation, about 9 to 15 feet of water. Attacking it with nano wrap right away, tipped with spikes, kind of pulling a lot of those aggressive fish first. If that doesn't work out, tubby jig, your choice of plastic. Color wise, I'd say pink or red. And then into the night, I'm noticing that I'm finding better quality fish, not necessarily on the jackpot, but in smaller pods that, fish will be grouped up anywhere from like 2 to 5 of them. I'm finding out that those are the really nice ones. And so kind of keen in on that. Hopefully it helps. Stay safe.
Hey, this is Ty Sennett. Just checking in and just giving you a fishing report up in Hayward, Wisconsin. Haven't been out a ton, usually about 4 days, 5 days a week so far. I'll be out every day starting next week. But been a lot of fish in the basins, crappie-wise, that is. A lot of crappie in the basin areas. Some of the weedier lakes, you'll get them on the weed lines right at sundown. They come out of those weeds at sundown, so target those areas in that 10 to 12-foot range. Walleye-wise, they're getting those. A lot of those are still in the weeds and along the weed lines. We're not getting a lot of walleye out in the deeper ranges. So as far as lures go, jigging wraps have been the best for the walleye. And we're using a lot of tip-ups over here in Wisconsin because we are allowed one more line than you guys in Minnesota there. So, and then for crappie, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Everything from just a plain old wax worm on a jig to, again, jigging wraps. Some of the more aggressive fish are hitting those jigging wraps and the nano wraps. So good luck out there and stay safe on the ice. Bye.
Trigger HTR Guide Service here in the beautiful Breda Lakes area. The walleye fishing is really good right now. We're catching fish a little bit deeper, 25, 28 foot of water range, using pink, gold, and silver spoons tipped with a minnow head. And we're using dead sticks up a little bit shallower, 21, 23 foot of range with a sucker minnow or a shiner on there has been working really well. Bandfish bites really good. We're catching crappies out in the basin areas, 20, 25 feet of water using spoons and small tungsten jigs with plastics, bluegills right up alongside of the weeds. Some of them are getting mixed in with the crappies out in the deeper basin. same program, spoons with a little bit of marabou on the treble hook and small jigs and plastics. This is Trigger Oaks. We'll see you in the next one.
All right, great bunch of reports from all these guys. I truly appreciate their effort week in and week out to bring you the latest information on what's going on out there all across the ice belt. So let's wrap this episode up. If you're doing a little pan fishing, if you're doing a little crappie fishing, take my advice, rig up a couple different baits. On top of rigging up those baits, make sure that you're using the right line species and the right rod type for the species you're targeting. Prime example, if you're doing a little crappie fishing, I like to use 3 and 4 pound test. I like a ultralight rod, but something with a lot of backbone. A great strike indicator. 13 Fishing makes a tickle stick, one of my favorites. The tickle stick is a classic as far as a great strike indicator, but plenty of backbone so you can catch those fish. You can bury those small little hooks that are on those tungsten into those fish's mouth. As far as perch are concerned, kind of along those same lines, they can be really aggressive, but extremely light biters. I will typically use 4 pound test with perch. I like a 4 pound test because if you're out on Mille Lacs Lake or Leech or Winnie, where there's perch, there's walleyes or pike. And so I like a little bit more of a pound test for those species because inevitably, I can't tell you how many times I've been using a really small tungsten bait and a great big walleye comes in and strikes it. So it's nice to have that 4 pound test. Crappies, bluegills, especially finicky bluegills, I'll downsize to a 2 pound test. If they're not quite as finicky, I might upsize as high as 3, but I hardly ever use 4 pound tests with bluegills. And so just keep that in mind. Having the right rod, the right power and action of rod, and then of course the right line species for these proper presentations, you're going to put way more fish topside. So hopefully everybody had a happy new year. Hopefully as we get into January here, you're getting out and exploring a little more. I know a lot of people get wrapped up with family events over the holidays. Now that that's past us, ice fishing is here. Looks like we're going to have a great January, February to come. I know a lot of lakes in northern Minnesota in particular, people are driving all over. Make sure if you're going up to a destination, you're calling ahead. I encourage you to go through resorts, taking the stake paths. If you are going on a new body water, bring the spud bars, the picks, the float suits, be safe. Good luck fishing, everybody. Until next week, I'll see you on the ice. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.